Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Simplicity first ever LinkedIn Live training series. I'm Carrie Morris, Vice President of Client Services. And before I introduce our speaker trainer, Julie Schaller, and the topic that we're going to share with you today, I wanted to spend a little bit of time just letting you know who we are at Simplicity Consulting. We are a marketing, communications, and business management consultancy company here in the Pacific Northwest. We're located in Kirkland, Washington when we're not in a pandemic. And we are here today to introduce a whole new training series for our audiences. I'm going to introduce everybody right now to Julie Schaller. She is a fabulous supporter of our company and our consultants and even our clients who are really interested in that transition work in their career. Julie is the co-founder of Empower Coaching. She is also a former Simplicity consultant and used to work on our staff many, many years ago. Julie, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you, Carrie. And like I said before, it's always really fun to partner with you guys on these because I feel like I'm kind of back with the family. So thank you for the introduction and for the opportunity. Let me just transition right into what we are going to be talking about today, which is communication tips to resolve workplace conflicts. So this has come up so much, particularly with the virtual world that we're living in right now. So we're going to dive into a few of the most common conflicts and just take a little time to go through those and ask whatever questions that you might have. But before I dive in, let me just share a quick little tidbit about us, Empower Coaching. So our company is a leadership and career growth company, and what we are really all about is empowering you to realize your potential, elevate your leadership, and create meaningful impact in a deeply fulfilling career. However, this is a little bit hard to do if you're dealing with communication challenges and workplace conflicts. And so that's why we want to move into what we're talking about today. So there's three things that I am going to share with you today. The first is that I hope by the time we're finished with this quick presentation that you'll have a better understanding of kind of the psychology behind why some of these conflicts even occur, which hopefully will give you the ability to sort of rise above and just understand it better. And then secondly, you'll get some of the pro tips that I call them to be able to resolve the conflict on the spot, whether it's with your colleagues or with your boss. And third, that you'll, in many cases, be able to understand how to preempt this conflict. So, it's great to be able to solve it in the moment, but it's even better to be able to move forward and be able to resolve it so that it doesn't occur again. So let's jump in. When we were talking earlier in building this presentation, we kind of really hovered around three main communication conflicts and workplace conflicts. And the first one is that the consultant community and our client community, including mine, really had voiced a challenge of how do I voice my opinion, especially in a virtual world? I feel like I'm not being heard. And so let's talk about that for a second. I want to share with you one of my client stories just to illustrate this point because she too was really challenged with this whole space of being able to voice her opinion. So Alyssa actually still does work in the nonprofit world. And we started coaching together because she really had a desire to advance her career. She really wanted to be promoted, to get ahead. And that wasn't happening for her. She felt like things were kind of stalled and stuck. And the challenge that she was experiencing was that the team that she was working with, although they were really great, they were all very opinionated and very strong voiced. And so she felt like she could barely get a word in edgewise. And the challenge for Alyssa was that she wasn't speaking up. She was kind of being drowned and falling behind in the shadows of this really vocal team that she was working with. But also what was happening for Alyssa is that she was falling into a habit of kind of people pleasing and maybe groupthink. And she wasn't really strongly communicating what she believed and what she felt were some of the right opinions and the right things to be done. And so the challenge then was when it was promotion time, her boss didn't really see her as a leader. He kind of saw her more as a follower. And so through the process, what happened with Alyssa is she really got to this place where she became much more confident in owning her value. She saw her worth and how that translated to the ideas and the opinions that she had in the company and what she thought that the team should be doing to further their nonprofit education causes. And so what happened over time was Alyssa really gained that confidence. She started sharing her voice. She actually started asking for what she wanted, which was that promotion. And ultimately, she was moved into a new role that she was really happy with. And then fast forward another year, she actually ended up leaving that one NGO and moving to a new one that was in Dallas and around her family area. So it just is a great story to illustrate some of the challenges, but also what can happen on the other side. And so let me share with you a few thoughts about why this was even occurring and some of the psychology around why it is difficult for some people to have their opinions heard. And so oftentimes what's underneath this is a fear of not being enough or maybe not being worthy. And when that's the underlying programming, then it can result in behavior that is either sometimes doubting, meaning like, I don't know if what I have to say is good enough. I don't know if it matters. I'm not sure whether somebody is going to object or reject what I have to say. And so these are the people that are a little bit more in the shadows and they're not speaking up. The other thing that can sometimes happen is that there's people, then you might work with some of these people, that they really dominate the conversation. They're always being opinionated. They're always putting it out there. They're always the ones that feel like what they have to say is the right thing. And they're not being heard. They may be voicing their opinion, but after a while, their loud voice of always being too opinionated is being drowned out. And so we don't really want either one of these, but really to find a good middle ground. And so you're kind of like, okay, that's great. So what do I do about this if I'm either in either one of these camps? And so there's a few what I'll call pro tips of things that you can take away, ideas that you can start to practice or implement in your work that can help you overcome this challenge of not feeling like you are able to voice your opinion. The first one is to just really be intentional. If this is a challenge area for you, go into your day and have a little game with yourself to go into your day, pick one day, and really be intentional about voicing your opinion in each meeting, or maybe pick one or two meetings. And part of this is just stretching yourself a little bit out of what might be your comfort zone, but also it is an ability for you to get some feedback, and you can look back at those meetings and say, how'd that go? And that kind of relates to the next point, which is what I like to call a test and learn approach. And so this is maybe more of a scientific approach. So you're taking any personal emotion out of this, that it's hard or that I'm mad or resentful, that I can't be heard. And you're taking more of a scientific approach of, let me test out what would happen if I really voiced my opinion, if I shared my recommendations, and let me see how that went over. And so that is another tip that you can practice on a meeting by meeting basis, or maybe a day by day basis. And the third thing is just expect maybe to feel uncomfortable. If this isn't something that you've regularly been doing, or maybe that you've been frustrated, and if you start to stretch and lean a little bit more into the conversation, that might feel a little awkward for you because it's just not been a habit that you've been doing. And so that's okay. That uncomfortableness is actually a clue that you're growing. So that's a good thing. So let me pause here, because what we wanted to be able to do is have a little space in between each scenario for you to ask whatever questions or clarification that you might want to know. So I'm going to turn it over to Carrie, who's monitoring the chat, to see if anything has come up from our audience in terms of any questions you might have about the challenges of voicing your opinion.
I don't see any questions coming up just as of yet, Julie, but I want to say this is super important and really beneficial to our consultant community. It seems like even regardless of the color of badge that you wear, there's always going to be this moment where you feel like you can't really get your voice heard. So I hope everybody tuning in, especially if you are a consultant, where you really, really have to share that point of view and that and have that self-starter mentality, that you're leveraging some of these tips and tricks. Really good stuff, Julie. Let's keep
Great.
going. Let's keep going.
Excellent. Good. Well, let's keep going. So the second challenge, communication tip that we can wrap around a workplace conflict is how to get direct feedback. This is a challenge on the opposite end, because sometimes when you're working, whether it's working in a contract or whether you're an FTE working on a program or project, being able to get that direct feedback is really important, because you need to have clarity on what you're supposed to be doing. And so let me share a quick story of another client that I worked with, Will, who had this exact scenario. Now, Will is a very direct personality. So he was incredibly frustrated because he kept finding himself with bosses that were a little bit soft, that really weren't giving him this direct feedback. And his scenario was that he was vying for a promotion for 4 years. And he was incredibly frustrated and actually angry, and then kind of a little resentful, because he really wanted to advance in his career, but he kept having this gap because his bosses were not giving him direct feedback on what he could change or what he needed to do differently. And so for Will, the real game changer was when he started to realize that what was happening to him was he was falling into kind of this victim mindset. He was really being resentful and blaming his bosses for not giving him this feedback. And what shifted for him was that he ended up really just, I like this expression, taking back his own power and really asking for what he needed, but coming from a place where he got really clear on the value that he could add to the business. And he also took kind of a no matter what approach. And so in his case, he was willing to change jobs so that he could advance his career. He was no longer going to be at the mercy of this series of bosses that were just really not giving him the kind of direct feedback that he needed. And so what ended up happening for him was that he actually did get an offer from another company, but because he knew his value and because he communicated that clearly of what he needed and what he wanted to deliver to the business, he ended up getting reorganized. Fortunately, amazing boss, because this is really what he was focused on, who did give him direct feedback. And in his case, it's a great success story because he got a double promotion within a year's period of time. So it just goes to show you that when you can make that shift and really be clear in asking for what you want, that really amazing things can happen. And so on the psychology side, this is a little bit of what I just alluded to with Will, that there are some people, in this case, Will's bosses, that just kind of have that brain wiring where they're oriented to want harmony. So they don't want to give direct feedback or uncomfortable feedback because it might hurt someone's feeling, or it might be awkward or uncomfortable. And what happens is that can result in a habit of indirect communication. It doesn't mean that you can't change somebody, but it just means that they start to fall into this pattern of just giving really light feedback, if any at all. And so you're like, okay, that's fine, but what do I do about this? So there's a few pro tips that I'll share with you in this case of really desiring direct feedback. The first is, I'll say, be compassionate. So if you are a really direct person and you want and need that direct feedback, don't be resentful. Be compassionate, knowing that other people are going to be kind of wired differently than you. And so coming into the conversation, I would say, even set up a follow-up side meeting to say, hey, I need to have more specific feedback. So if you're in a meeting, you can ask and clarify in the moment, but do so respectfully, not resentfully. And then also expect, I have this phrase, expect that feathers might be ruffled. So if there's people that don't want conflict that you're working with, and so therefore they're not giving direct feedback, if you start asking for that and being kind of forthright, you might get them a little upset. That might be awkward for them. And so that's okay as long as you're coming at it from a respectful standpoint and really from a desire to give the most value to the business. So it's not about you and what you need. I mean, that's underlying. But what it's really about is like, hey, I really need this direct feedback on what we're doing on this project so that I can do the best work possible to benefit our clients. And so you're really couching that request in the perspective of adding the most value to your team or to the business. And then on this one, it's like, how do I preempt this? Because it can be a habit when you're working with someone who's not giving you direct feedback. And so my best suggestion on this would be to set up a separate meeting or a call with whether it's your boss or a peer or your client. And then if you, like, say, for example, you've had a project or a program that you're working on and you're just not clear because nobody's giving you direct feedback. And so if you set up a side meeting with just that person to say, hey, I need more clarification. Can you do this for me? You have their 100% attention. Rather than trying to push it in a meeting where you've got 6 other people, that can be a little bit tricky because you may have an agenda that you need to get through. And so the second tip is to really express your desire, your need, your concern, like I mentioned before, from this value add, not a victim mindset like what Will was falling into. So it's not like, I need this. You're not giving this to me. That will not go over very well. It's more like, hey, I know I can add a lot of value. I just need more clarification on what you want my role to be in this. And so you're asking that in terms of really just expressing concern for the end result. And then you can, if you choose, I'll say gently, ask for what you want. So saying, hey, next time, could you please give me really good clarity, or could you please be more direct and include less stories and examples if that's what you need. And so I'll give that as an option, but sometimes people don't realize that they're in this pattern of indirect communication. And so they tend to just kind of keep on that path until someone raises it to their attention. And that's what we're talking about here in preempting the conflict. So let me pause here and see, do any of you on the line have any questions or clarifications that you might want about this workplace conflict? Because I bet this probably comes up a decent amount for people.
We do have some questions, Julie, some of which may apply to this last segment of the training, but some that are just questions popping up.
Good.
And wanting to ask the expert, which is you. Tosh is asking, hey, how do I inject myself if everyone else in the meeting is more senior to myself? And I think that's a really good question, especially with some of the consultants that we have on our team that are a little more early in career, but they have a point of view. How should they show up in that moment?
Yeah, I mean, that is a tricky one, particularly in a virtual setting, because you don't have the body language. You can't lean in as easily as you can when you're in person around a table. And so this is one that I will say takes a bit of practice and a bit of skill. And I'll say actually also persistence. And so certainly in a virtual setting, then you may need to try to insert yourself a few times. Like, if you're just watching for that pause in the conversation where you can say, hey, can I share a thought? Or, hey, I have a recommendation. And so you're just really paying attention to anytime there's a lull in that conversation. And it also takes what I mentioned earlier, you're coming from a place of owning your worth, in knowing that your opinion and your recommendation is important to share. If you're in with senior leadership, here's a pro tip. Make sure that you are being concise and brief with your points. So what not to do is to share a lengthy story or a lengthy explanation, because that might be a little frustrating and you won't be seen as adding as much value as if you're being more articulate. So that is a tip for you on that. If all fails in the meeting, then my suggestion would be to do a follow-up with your client and say, hey, I really have a lot, as a follow-up meeting, say, these meetings are going great. I have a lot to add, but I'm having a difficult time inserting, what do you recommend? And then I'll bet that especially if your client is in those meetings, then he or she may turn the table over to you.
That is a great idea, and I hope that Ashutosh, you will take that tip and try it out, see if it works. And we're going to give Julie's contact information right after this. So if anybody wants to have a separate session with Julie after this live session, she'll be sure to give out her information. I want to go to Molly really quickly. She asked a question, and I think it does pertain to this last session, which is, how do you manage folks, Julie, who have big egos? So again, the conflict is maybe not with the manager, but with the team members in that, when direct feedback or receiving.
That
feedback.
is such a good question, and it is so common. And here's what I'll say. So if you've got a lot of big egos in the room, then what you're going to need to practice is to meet like with like. And what I mean by that is that if your tendency is to lean back or maybe to be a little quieter, and you've got a lot of big egos, big personalities, lots of vocal people, then you're not being heard. And what you'll need to practice is really stepping up, leaning in, being maybe louder than you might normally be, because they will not hear you. So if you have a really strong, direct personality that you're working with, you're going to need to rise to that same level. Maybe not all the time, but some of the time. Be direct, maybe even a little edgy in your feedback, to practice that, because that's the way that you're going to be heard. And then once that pattern starts to be a little easier for you, then you'll be kind of have a seat at the table, so to speak, with those personalities. And if that is a complete fail and it doesn't work, then you're kind of in a different place, like my example that I shared with Will, where you'll need to take your own needs into account. So if you're working on a long project and it's just not a fit for you, then when that contract comes up for renewal, it might be time for you to look for a new team or a new environment that is much more conducive to the, it's your people that you can work with more easily. So that
and I love that you're saying that, because it's simplicity, and for sure in our company, the way that we would handle that is very much what you just said, Julie. Kind of rise to that moment. And if it's not working, we have a client success manager team that's going to be with you throughout that contract. So if you need support in that moment, pull us in, and we can help you. And to your point too, maybe it's time to think about a different project. Maybe it's just not a style fit. And that happens. We have some other questions, but I'm going to let you get back to your slides, Julie, and then we'll take the rest of these in the next batch. Okay.
Okay. Excellent. Well, let's move on to the next and the last kind of conflict area. And this is one that came up when we were talking amongst ourselves before, of like, how do you deal with an apathetic, or I'll say indifferent, communication style? This would be like, I'm working with someone who basically just has their head in the sand all the time. They're disengaged. What do you do? So let me tell a quick story about one of my clients, Christina, and she still is a consultant, and she was experiencing this. Now, Christina, like Will, still does have a very direct personality style. She is the kind of woman that gets shit done. You put her on a project and she's going to get it done. And she was working with a client who was just really kind of disengaged, and not only not giving her very much not giving her direct feedback, but barely giving her any feedback at all, and really apathetic in her style. And that was incredibly frustrating to Christina, because she couldn't do her best work and she wasn't getting the kind of direction that she needed. And so there was this situation for her where there was a lot of conflict, and honestly, a bit of butting heads as it got to it, because she was just walking home at the end of the day being incredibly frustrated. And so the shift for her was just to recognize that not everybody sees work or sees life even the same way she did. And so there was a bit of opening up her mind and looking at more of what I'll call the human side of what was happening with her client. And I'll talk about that in a second. But essentially what she did was Christina brought a little more compassion to the situation, and really just had a side meeting with her boss and said, hey, I really want to deliver on what we need to do. is everything okay? And what was interesting was that her boss didn't even realize that she was showing up that way until Christina just really kindly brought it up from a human to human perspective. And then things changed, and Christina was able to communicate how she worked, which was really all on getting things done. And they had a mutual agreement. And then when the contract was up for renewal, instead of leaving like Christina thought that she was going to do, it was almost like, oh my gosh, when is this contract going to end? How quickly can I get out of here? And it shifted where she really saw they had a nice, the relationship mended, and Christina was able to continue to renew the contract and deliver great value. And so just it really took that shift of her, instead of being so 100% business oriented and work, she had a little more compassion. And so let me give you a little bit of the backdrop on why this can occur. There's obviously a lot of different reasons for disengagement. I mean, people might be really bored with their job and disengaged. But right now, especially, one of the greatest reasons for apathy or indifference is because people are under psychological stress. There's the same demands and the same requirements. The business isn't slowing down, but yet we are working in a totally different scenario and environment. So people are working from home, not in the office. They might have small children that they're navigating as well. They've got the same requirements. Maybe they're not able to really communicate or do things as easily as they could as they were in the office. Not to mention the fact of personal stresses. How's their health? How's the health of their family? What is the news media saying? Like, there's just a lot of psychological stress going on right now. And here's the thing, you guys, when we're under stress, that consumes a lot of our energy, which means that we have less energy to dedicate to work. It just is a fact. And so what can happen when we just our energy of showing up, of adding our opinion, of having passion, like all of those are muted, and that can result in a habit of apathy or indifference. And so what do you do here? So a couple of quick tips. Be empathetic. Like I mentioned with Christina, call or set up that one-on-one. Notice that pattern of communication from a really kind way and express the willingness to help. These can be some tips to help make that shift. So let me pause here. I know we're kind of right at the point. So Carrie, would you like to kind of wrap up, or do you want to be able to carry on for those who could still stay?
Yeah, no, I think right now we do have one other question from Maria, who is actually a consultant with Simplicity. Can you hear me? Oh, okay, sorry. Apologies. This is the live moment, you guys. We're going to have some glitches. Bear with us. Anyway, Maria is asking a question about, and I love this question, it comes up oftentimes, pointers on how to help others have their opinions heard too, especially those who are more introverted. What do you say to that question, Julie?
That is such a great question, because especially for those of you who are managers, or for those of you that know that there's the diversity of opinion that's needed to be heard. One of the best things that you can do is to, what I'll say, create space in the meeting for someone else. And so what that might look like is you're on video, all of you are there, someone on your team has an opinion, or we want their feedback. So then say, hey, Jane, what are your thoughts on this? So essentially you're creating the space and sort of tossing the ball over to them to give them an opening to be able to share their opinion. That's a great question.
I know, it's a good question. There's always ways, I think, that we can help everybody feel included in those meetings. Yeah. And I think that Maria's asking that question either for herself or for colleagues and team members. I mean, even if you're a consultant and you're working with other stakeholders who are FTEs, sometimes you need to open up that dialogue too for the FTEs as a consultant and be that trusted advisor. I know we're hitting the 30-minute mark. I definitely want to just say, Julie, first of all, thank you. This was so impactful as a trainee, and I know a lot of people are going to take some of these pro tips away and they're going to implement them in their day-to-day, whether they're a consultant or a full-time employee. Is there anything that you want to offer the listeners, both on LinkedIn Live, but also through the Facebook Live community as well?
Sure. I mean, let me just share this last slide with everybody. Sure. my whole desire is to really give back. So for those of you that are challenged, whether it's with workplace conflicts or really just in a place of really wanting to reinvent yourself and grow, then here is my offer to you. Go to tinyurl.com, my name, Julie Schaller, and book some time with me. I'm happy to talk to you about how you can reinvent yourself, how you can grow, or maybe even just how you can overcome some of these workplace conflicts. So happy to be here and happy to give back to the community.
You are so generous, Julie. And I know several of our consultants who have worked with you in the past and have had such great success reinventing themselves. I think that this is the time to think about, where are the gaps in skills and how can I retrain and or just find meaningful work, but doing the work that you love. And so that's why Julie Schaller is our featured presenter and speaker today. She will be on future trainings, I promise you. And I just want to say again, Julie, thank you for your time. Thank you for your value. And thank you for your generosity.
You are so welcome. It's my pleasure.
Thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll see you in the future in our Simplicity LinkedIn Live and Facebook Live studio.